Okay, we've talked a little bit about the corporation. Let's talk a little bit about financial management in the corporation. So, what is the correct goal of financial management? Is it to maximize profits? Is it to minimize costs? Is it to maximize market share? Is it to maximize shareholder wealth? Or is it to maximize the stakeholders? Or is it something else? So this is a question that I'm sure will come up in discussion questions about what a corporation should actually be doing. And if we're stakeholders to the corporation, as not necessarily shareholders to a corporation, stakeholders being someone that, say, lives in the same town as the corporation. If you were living in a town where they had a steel mill, but you weren't directly employed by the steel mill, and the steel mill closed and everyone moved, obviously your business, your livelihood, etc., is going to be majorly impacted by that. So you have a stake in that corporation, even though you're not working there. And so this has happened to many, many people, obviously, that corporations act in a way that is not necessarily in their best interest, in the benefit of the stakeholder, but in the best interest of the shareholders, moving companies overseas and changing plants and possible pollution and all the other things that you can think of that are negative that corporations do. And so what is the correct goal is a matter of debate. And so as you think about this, I would just offer you a method or a thought on how to think about it. The question becomes not necessarily what the goals are, but how are you going to make a decision? So think about it from the standpoint of the corporation or the financial manager of the corporation of how are we going to make a decision? What is the focus of the decision? Do we manage the company based on the stock price going up, or do we manage the company on some other metric? Now, I would suggest that if you don't take into account at least for a significant portion of your decisions the impact on the stock price, then I would suggest that your stockholders are going to sell your stock. And the fastest way to work your way out of a job as a CEO or a CFO is to ignore the stock price and do what you feel you should do for other people. And the shareholders will say, oh, you're not paying attention to me. Well, my reaction to that will be, I will sell your stock. And as the stock plummets, the people who are still holding the stock will start screaming for a change in management and a focus that refocuses the company back on the share price. So while there are lots of reasons to consider things like stakeholders and the outside environment, the external environment, and so on, if we don't consider at least a significant portion of our decision making on that share price, the shareholders will do what is natural, which is to sell the shares. And if they sell the shares, a good portion of the funding of the company will not be there. And in fact, if you're just starting a company and you go to the venture capitalists or you go to the market and ask to borrow money or to have people invest by issuing shares in the market, the first thing they're going to ask is how much profit are you going to make? And if you say, well, we're not really in it for profit, they'll say, well, that's nice. We have a whole nonprofit sector over there and people will donate money to you, but that's not what we do in the capital markets. We're here to make money. So the point being that when you start thinking about the role of the financial manager, is it always at all costs to raise the stock price? No, absolutely not. There are stakeholders and we should consider them. On the other hand, if you don't consider the shareholders, then their natural tendency will be to sell the stock, which means more shareholders will get more upset and more shareholders will sell the stock in a downward cycle, which means you'll lose your funding for the corporation. And if you lose your funding for the corporation, of course, you don't have one anymore. So consider that as you're debating the stakeholder and how far a company should go to take care of people other than the shareholder. So they certainly should go beyond just the shareholder, but that line in the sand is difficult. And obviously it's much easier if you're making tons of profits. But if you're not making tons of profits, the shareholders are the ones that are going to easily and quickly vote, and they vote by selling their shares. So consider that as you start to sort of tussle with the question of what the real goal of a corporation should be. And we're talking about big corporations, major corporations, faceless corporations. Obviously, in a sole proprietorship, it's up to the question of the owner. If all the money comes to me in the company, I can decide to fund things. I can lower wages or raise wages and lower profits at will because they're my profits. The difference here in a corporation is they're not your profits. The profits are for the shareholders, and the shareholders get to vote, and they vote every day when the market's open by whether they hold the shares or buy the shares. And if they vote to sell the shares, you'll find out really quickly that the financial management of the company is not what they agree with. So consider that as you start to wrestle with what should a major corporation be doing with regard to things beyond just taking care of the shareholder.